Hi guys. Before we proceed to this video, we've got something very important to share with you. Neoliberalism, Inequality and Authoritarianism by Professor Jon V. Kofas is available for purchase. You can order it directly from the publisher Little French eBooks or through Amazon.
Hello everyone, welcome. This is a teaser session on the official recognition of Afghanistan by the Kremlin, by Russia, Vladimir Putin's Russia. This is 4 years, about 4 years, since the Taliban government has taken over Afghanistan in 2021. That was in August 2021, shortly after the United States government retreated from Afghanistan, given that the United States had been there from 2001. Shortly after 9/11, George W. Bush sent U.S. troops there in pursuit of Al-Qaeda, the jihadist group that was involved in the 9/11 terror attack. Afghanistan had been under military occupation for 2 decades. The United States spent enormous amounts of money to subdue Afghanistan and to impose a puppet regime that never succeeded, and the U.S. retreated. In the longer video that I invite all of you to take a look at, the analytical video, we look at the history of Afghanistan, which is a landlocked country of about 42 million people, roughly 3/4 of them below the poverty line. This is one of the poorest countries in the world. And on top of that, of course, it remains a country that the West has imposed sanctions on. And the United States U.S. Treasury Department has frozen about close to $10 billion, which for Afghanistan may not be a lot for the United States, but for Afghanistan, it's a lot of money. That is assets of Afghanistan. Russia's interest in Afghanistan actually is long-standing. It goes back to, and this is one of the issues, to the 19th century. This is one of the issues I will be covering in the analytical video, and I would, and again, I ask all of you to take a look at that. Under the Romanov dynasty in the 19th century, until the beginning of the early 20th century, the fact is that Afghanistan was a part of what is called the game theory, basically a tool that was a tool of imperialism between the British Empire and the Russian Empire. The Russian Empire, of course, had an interest in Afghanistan, in influencing Afghanistan. And so the Romanov dynasty tried to impose its influence in there, make it part of its zone of influence. The Romanovs had a policy of internal colonialism. They would not expand outside the Eurasian continent, but they did have a policy of internal colonialism going back to Ivan the Terrible. So this, and Peter the Great, Catherine the Great. So the Romanovs were, in fact, the Tsars of Russia, were in fact interested in internal colonization and in influencing, securing zones of influence all around Russia proper, what is now the Russian Federation. Now, the fact is that Russia is a very different country, Then Afghanistan, in terms of GDP measured in purchasing power parity, Russia ranks around fourth, fifth in the world. Afghanistan between 105 and 110th in the world. It's a very poor country. However, Afghanistan has very rich resources, especially mineral resources, including, by the way, something that the West and China and many in Europe, many countries in Europe, companies want, and that is rare earth elements, minerals, which are very important for the new technology as well as the defense sector. Russia was making moves immediately after the U.S. Retreated. The Biden administration, of course, which was heavily criticized for retreating, as though there were any possibility of a military solution in Afghanistan. After 20 years, that, by the way, the U.S. had exhausted all possibilities. And this was at a huge cost to the American taxpayer, who saw no benefit from being in this very poor country, where the economy had once again, during the 2-decade-long military occupation of the country, the opium trade, by the way, the narcotics trade, had skyrocketed, and Afghanistan became one of the world's most important opium producer. The Taliban had basically suppressed that in the 1990s, and then this makes a return under U.S. occupation. Now, the question is, of course, what was the aim, the diplomatic aim? What are the aims, I should say, of Russia in this rapprochement, in the official recognition, because Russia was the first country to officially recognize. Let me make a technical point here. There were countries before Russia, Russia among them, of course, that had extended de facto recognition. In other words, at the ambassadorial level, China, India, Pakistan, United Arab Emirates, a number of regional countries, had started to deal with the Taliban. The reality is the Taliban were there, and they had to be dealt with, and they began to deal with it. And the Taliban themselves opened their vast mineral resources to Western and non-Western companies from China. Obviously, China, very, very important for Afghanistan. China has had its eye on Afghanistan. In fact, I had argued years ago that the main beneficiary of the U.S. military occupation of Afghanistan was, in fact, China, both geopolitically, and Iran, but China, both geopolitically and geoeconomically. Now, China gave its blessing to Russia to go ahead and extend official recognition. And Russia has its own problems, especially given that in February 2022, Russia started a war against Ukraine, and it's still going on. And this appears to be that Russia has a war economy now. In other words, the so-called forever war doctrine of the neoconservatives in Europe and the United States seems to apply to Russia as well, considering that it doesn't want a victory of Ukraine. Now, Beijing has made it very clear that it does not want NATO to prevail in Russia, because it would mean a green light for NATO expansion into Eurasia through the Trans-Caucasus region, Central Asia. And this is where Afghanistan comes in, by the way. In other words, it's a counterweight to the United States, to US/NATO expansion into Eurasia and Asia, because that's where NATO, let's face it, this is where NATO wants to expand, because it feels threatened by the ascendancy, the global economic ascendancy of China. So the government of Xi Jinping in China had gave its green light and its blessing to Russia to do this. Russia wants to cultivate, it made it clear, it wants to cultivate good relations with Afghanistan at the economic level. In fact, it invited representatives from the Taliban government to attend meetings in the Central Asian in the Trans-Caucasus sessions, as well as Russian-headed regional sessions of neighboring countries. That's good and fine, except that, of course, the major trading partners of Afghanistan are really Gulf states, Pakistan, India, China. Russia is really there more for geopolitical leverage. And like I said, this is a long-standing policy of Russia going back to the Romanov period. I should tell you, by the way, that when the Bolshevik Revolution took place in 1917, in October 1917, the October Revolution, the Soviet Union, as it was established, seized any imperialist ambitions of the Romanov period, of the Tsarist era, toward Afghanistan, not just toward Afghanistan, toward all countries, and extended official recognition. However, in 2001, when George W. Bush wanted to go in and go after terrorists, the Al-Qaeda group that hit several targets, not just New York, several targets in the United States, the Kremlin agreed with that, gave its blessing to that. Russia has a minority Muslim population, and it is surrounded by Muslim countries, although Vladimir Putin has handled that issue rather well, constantly pointing out that the Kremlin follows a policy of rapprochement and tolerance toward Muslims and so forth. Russia is really trying to demonstrate to the world that it still is a country capable of consolidating allies and building alliances and alignments in the Central Asian region and in South Asia. And it is also interested in making sure wherever there's a power gap, as in this case left by the United States, Russia moves in. Now, the United States did denounce, unlike China, which gave its blessing to this. China has nothing to worry. Russia is a long-standing partner with deep roots in China, independence of China. Russia depends heavily on China. The U.S. immediately criticized the Kremlin for doing this, although there's nothing the U.S. can do about the Kremlin's official recognition, because on two issues, by the way. One is human rights. The other issue is women, the role of women in Afghan society. Now, it's true that the Afghan regime, by any standard, does not have a good record on both counts. It is also true, however, that in the 1980s, when there was a regime that was more secular oriented and provided, I wouldn't say equal rights, but many more rights for women, the US at that time, as we'll see in the longer video, collaborated with the Mujahideen, who evolved into the Taliban in the 1990s. So in the 1980s, the US bombarded, if you will, collaborated with jihadists to make sure that the Soviet-backed regime of the 1980s was undermined, and that's the regime that was secular-oriented, pro-women. Now it cries out about the role of women in human rights. No such crying out, by the way, when it comes to the Palestinian women and children, I should add children in this case, in Gaza, or no such crying out about the role of women in human rights in the Gulf states. And so the duplicity of US foreign policy in this manner it speaks for itself. No one has to point it out. It's there for everybody to see. So this is cherry picking human rights approach, which has been a long-standing foreign policy, going back to the Carter administration in 1979, which coincided, by the way, in 1979, the Iranian Revolution coincided with the emergence of a left-wing regime supported by the Soviet government. I ask you to take a look at the longer video, the analytical video, write comments, ask questions, and by all means, join this channel, follow this channel. Thank you very much.